got so much sleep.
I know.
It is always nice to fall back.
Sometimes when you get too much sleep, it's worse.
I tried to go back to sleep twice. So no, get up, read a book for a couple hours. That was nice.
I know, I woke up, looked at the clock. Kids were like, "Are we going to church?" I was like, "Yeah, we'll go to the second service because we already missed the first one." Kara's like, "No, it's only 8 o'clock."
It was 8:30 each. The girls are like, "Are we going to first service?" I was like, "No, it's too late." I was like, "What? No, it's not."
Well, I hope everybody got a chance to read chapter 3, Thinking Circumstantially. This was probably my favorite chapter so far, just because all of the cosmic circumstantial cases are essentially just natural theology. You know, the arguments for God's existence from nature and philosophy and science. So he begins the chapter by comparing direct and circumstantial evidence, and concludes the chapter by pointing out that people, especially Christians, seem to underestimate the rhetorical power of indirect or circumstantial evidence. At the very end, he says, I'm alarmed sometimes when I hear Christians make inaccurate statements related to the nature of evidence. When discussing evidence with skeptics, we don't need to concede that a particular fact related to the Christian worldview has no evidential value simply because it's not an example of direct evidence. Even though a particular fact may not have the individual power to prove our case in its entirety, it's no less valid as we assemble the cumulative evidence. So why do you suppose that people often treat circumstantial evidence or indirect evidence as less compelling than direct evidence? Why do you think that's a problem, or why do you think that's the case? At least within criminal proceedings.
I think that it's a more complex argument. It's not as simplistic an argument. The circumstantial evidence, in large part, relies on a system of evidence, or a grouping of evidence.
Yeah.
To really make it compelling, and so it's not. You can't take an individual piece of circumstantial evidence and make a compelling case from it. It involves more work. It involves more of a larger approach. I think that's part of the reason.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. It's more dependent on volume, whereas direct evidence like eyewitness testimony and a camera might explicitly show the way things unfolded. I think, at least with criminal cases, people tend to place higher value on direct evidence. I think because they want confidence when making a verdict, right? And I think we have this fear of convicting someone of something they didn't do, right? But does that apply to our Christian worldview? Like, it's kind of a different thing, right? Like, you're not making a verdict about someone's life. You're not handing down a sentence. But I suppose there is a pretty substantial gamble you know, if this whole God thing is true, you know, you're kind of you're wagering your life. You're wagering your whole worldview. You're wagering eternity, really. If life doesn't end at the grave, you know, what more could you have than eternity to lose, right? So,
I think one thing, I think that popular media and stuff has really affected our perception of circumstantial evidence.
That's very true as well.
Made it seem like it's not valid, or it's not significant, or it can lead us in the wrong direction. Whereas in some cases, a cluster of circumstantial evidence can actually be much more compelling and all in some cases like eyewitness testimony.
Yeah, because people mistake reality. Like, they see things the wrong way, they remember things incorrectly. You know, our perception can be distorted, not to mention how much more prevalent images and video can be falsified. So, like you said, direct evidence seems to be kind of losing its weight. Yeah, not to say that it's invalid, but just circumstantial evidence or indirect evidence.
And the lies of even FBI and police, framing people and stuff, and the history of that, he begins to lose credibility and stuff. Even with that.
I heard a debate between William Lane Craig and Keith Parsons. I can put a link to it up there on the YouTube video, where they're talking about what kind of evidence would be necessary to convince this atheist, Keith Parsons, that God does exist. And in the course of the debate, they talk about if there was video evidence of the resurrection, would that be enough to convince you that Jesus rose from the dead? And he says no. Not even video evidence would be sufficient, because he would claim that it's much more likely than a miracle occurring. It's much more likely that, someone with some serious special effects, powers like Disney would have doctored the footage. And that would have been, direct evidence, film footage of the resurrection. Even that would have been insufficient. Have you seen that debate with Keith Parsons? It's sort of an older debate, but the ending of it kills me, because they're talking about the eyewitness testimony of the disciples. The disciples were fully convinced that they had seen the risen Lord, and Keith Parsons says that they were all hallucinating. Like, it's much more likely that they were hallucinating than that they had witnessed a miracle, because he's just, he has this predisposition against miracles. And so then in their closing remarks, Dr. Craig says, I have a feeling that no amount of evidence would be sufficient to convince you, because you've just made this a priori rejection of all of the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus and for the truth of God's existence. And he tries to deny it by saying, no, I would, if I were to walk out of this building today and God were to open the heavens and, light shine down on me, and he'd say, I do exist, Keith M. Parsons, and I'm sick of your logic chopping. Yeah, he's like, then I would join you in the front row of the pews on Sunday morning. And Dr. Craig goes, don't you think you would say that, wow, I must have just had the most insane hallucination?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a good one.
So the chapter covers a series of natural theology arguments and evidences for God's existence. And really the purpose of it is to demonstrate the cumulative nature of circumstantial evidence. And it was something that we talked about last week, that you had made the point, Scott, about how evidence taken alone might not seem to have as much weight in a case, but taken cumulatively, the cumulative power gives it a lot of strength. And so then, the chapter continues by drawing the analogy between the cumulative power of all of these circumstantial pieces of evidence in this hypothetical murder case with all of the arguments and evidence for the existence of God, like the origin of the universe, the fine-tuning of the universe, origin of life, the anthropic principle. One that struck me as interesting, I'm not really familiar with the evidence from the existence of true evil. That one kind of confused me a little bit. I wish he had talked a little bit more about it. But I think, if I understand correctly, that might be just arguing it's the argument from evil. I'm not sure where the true part comes in.
It does actually.
Well, he talks about objective morality.
Yeah.
But just in this illustration, it's labeled as evidence from the existence of true evil. Like the word "true" in there, especially throws me off.
What page are you looking at?
This is page 72.
Guess I should have bought the expanded version.
It might be.
It's not in its first edition.
Oh, it's not in chapter 3.
Yeah, it just has fine-tuning, design, moral and casual, religious, ontological, aesthetic, transcendental.
Yeah. All of these.
There's like extra 4 or something.
Oh, you're just looking at the illustration?
Yeah, just in the illustration. Yeah, there's like a knife, and it says evidence from the existence of true evil. I'd be curious to look into that.
There's some similarities between the morality and evil.
Right.
I've seen, and I mentioned my buddy Justin was an atheist, and we talked a lot when we were younger. He actually turned to Christ because of the existence of true evil during COVID, and seeing all the evil around and all the government's doing, and he's like, if there's evil, if there's actually real evil, there's got to be an opposite to that.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, typically I've heard that referred to as the argument from evil.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's what he's referring to there.
Yeah.
Recognizing the existence of it.
Mhm.
If there's one force, there's an equal and opposite force.
Well, not exactly. It's more just that if evil, exists and it bothers you so much, you have to reconcile the fact that if there is no God, if there is no objective morality, then you're mistaken about the nature of evil. Because if nihilism is true, or if atheism is true, then what you are bothered by is just a fact of life. It's just a fact of nature. I don't want to go too deep into a rabbit hole about the ontology of evil, but
We love rabbit holes. Come on.
the idea of true evil is kind of funny. If you think about the negative ontological status of evil, it's like a hole in a shirt. So the hole is the evil, right, and the shirt is the good. So the hole is the absence of good in the shirt, but you can't have pure whole. Like, you just don't have a shirt, you have nothing, right? So hopefully that helps clarify it. It's not that evil is like an equal and opposite force, rather that evil is the absence of good. So I guess that's why the use of this word true here kind of throws me off, because it's like, are we saying that there is an equal and opposite force? Because anyway.
Well, I think that, to me, the argument with evil is that, you recognize that there is evil. You recognize that there is something there. You recognize that there is a morality within you that is ingrained and substantive, and you recognize this as a violation of that morality. Okay, where did that come from?
Right.
Right.
You know, where did this morality come from that you're so bothered by its violation?
Yeah, and unless it came from God, the only other possible explanation is moral Platonism. The idea that morality exists as just abstract objects like numbers and sets, and but the problem with that is that on that view, on moral Platonism, if morality exists simply as abstract objects like numbers and sets and things like that, then what duty, what responsibility do we have to abide by morality? None. So it doesn't. It loses its objectivity. It loses its
I would say it loses its
power.
subjectivity.
Right.
Well, yeah.
Because are they saying it's like instinctual? It's
No,
it's
they're
more
saying
fight or flight element instead of an actual.
no. So moral Platonism would be the idea that there are moral truths that are objective, that are true for everybody, but they exist as abstract objects similar to mathematical truths. So, like the number 2 exists, but where does it exist? Well, it doesn't exist anywhere. It's an abstract object. It's just this. It's an idea,
Right.
And so it retains the objectivity of morality without ascribing it to God. It's grounded in just abstract, Platonic space. But like I said, it has no. It's causally effete, so you can't bump into the number 2. The number 2 can't cause you to
Right.
do something. And so if moral Platonism were true, we would have no accountability to that morality. And so either there is objective morality and it's rooted in a lawgiver, namely God, or there is no objective morality and it's all just a figment of our imaginations, which few people I think would submit to that or would admit to that.
So are they saying that's defined, or are they saying it changes based on how they calculate it?
No,
As
it's
a
predefined.
societal?
Yeah, no. It's the objectivity part of it is where they rooted in the Platonism. So it would just be they would exist uncreated like numbers. They just exist in and of themselves. I'm not saying that's what I believe in. It's just that,
Just wondering how that applies to society, where do they have to discover morality? or
yeah,
what?
exactly. Yeah, no.
Well,
That's precisely it.
But they're saying it's
Discover it,
finite, like it
but-
exists.
Right, it's always been there. They discover it,
Right.
and a lot of times they get those intertwined, and they go, "Oh, well, morality didn't exist. We discovered it, or we invented it through evolution and the necessity to be nice to each other."
Right.
It's
Well,
interesting,
that's
'cause they're saying if you're discovering, then it must have originated from
Yes.
somewhere else then.
Yeah.
right.
But you don't know where it originated. Because we're not inventing mathematics, we're just
Right.
discovering it. So it's like,
And
it's
then-
kind of a reverse argument on yourself.
Yeah.
But that was, you kind of played into that, like, he mentioned if aliens existed,
Mm-hmm.
he was saying that would be counter to the morality argument. Is what he was saying is like, so if we have an idea of morality and then you find aliens and their idea of morality is different,
Well,
then would it,
Oh, you're saying with the objective morality?
would it
That's interesting.
support or,
because you run into people every day. Well, not every day.
Yeah.
We run into people in life who don't agree with us on morality. Are they aliens? They could be.
right?
I mean, that doesn't mean that their morality or what they think of morality is true.
Well, I've heard that argument, that discussion before, and it's like you take someone who's supposedly amoral, and you get in the room with them and you know, start beating them up, they recognize that that's wrong.
Yeah.
You know, suddenly they discover morality.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you steal from them. They suddenly recognize that, oh, there is a morality.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, they may not admit as such, but you know, they have that ingrained morality, even though they choose to ignore it in many cases. When you violate it, you know, and attack them, then suddenly they recognize that truth.
Yeah, so I think what you're referring to, Daniel, is where he says, unless there is a law above the laws, an entity such as Star Trek's United Federation of Planets would be powerless to stop immoral behavior. Objective morality must be rooted in something bigger than the evolutionary development of any one species, meaning that it's true for everybody, regardless of whether you're human or you're an animal or you're an alien or you're a plant, you know, any kind of living thing. It's true regardless of who you are and where you come from or what you believe. It's true for everybody, whether you exist or not. It's objective. It's rooted in reality, or more specifically, rooted in the super reality that is God.
Right.
Yeah, I think a good video example is some reasonable faith. There was a little cartoon video.
Mm-hmm.
The guy's talking about morality. Guy walks up to him, mugs him, takes his wallet, and he's like, "That's wrong. I want justice." I was like, "Well, why is it wrong?"
Right. Exactly, and that's kind of where it gets to. Like, if somebody gets beat up or mugged, their perception of morality is based on their feelings, their emotions. Like, well, this doesn't feel good to me, therefore it must not be moral. Well, that doesn't feel good to them, or to them, and to them. So this whole morality argument becomes, you're never going to please anybody. So you have to have a transcendent morality in a sense, because you can't just have individual moralities to come up with this. This is what morality is.
Yeah.
It's always going to be ever changing. It's like, well, that person likes being beat up. There's a weird people out there, yeah. He likes to get mugged. It excites him or something. So
Right. So without
it's
objective morality,
yeah.
we would have no basis for
Right.
justice or laws.
Right.
What's interesting is a couple years ago, Randy and I went to a conference where we heard a talk about the argument from beauty, and it was really kind of confusing because here he talks about the argument of aesthetic experience, and the more he talked about it, the more I started realizing that the argument from beauty is just the argument from morality all over again, just using different words. Because going into it, I thought to myself, well, isn't beauty just in the eye of the beholder? And yeah, there's space for that, but really, it's the same argument as the argument from the existence of objective morality, because whatever is evil is whatever is not godly, and so the whatever is ugly or disorderly or broken is whatever is not godly. God gives the quality and beauty and orderliness of things, and so the best way to look at the argument from aesthetic experience or beauty is to just replace a few words from the argument for morality, because they're more or less the same, right? The absence of goodness is what we call evil. The absence of beauty is what we call disorder or ugliness. So that was just kind of interesting. I feel like the aesthetic experience argument, or the argument from beauty, is kind of just like sort of a reformulation of the argument from objective morality.
For me, that one was like, you have the capacity to realize and see beauty in things. That in of itself, right? That's not something that dog has, right? That's something that's unique to us that God has given us. That's kind of how I grabbed that.
It's interesting. My nephew sent me a photo he'd taken. He was back in Missouri, and he was deer hunting. He shows this beautiful sunset, and there's this deer, and it looks, at least, like it's looking at and enjoying the sunset. And it's just kind of odd, you know, do animals recognize that beauty? And
I just had that thought.
I don't know.
Like they
you know, I mean,
should.
it just triggered a thought, and it's like, are they capable of that? I mean,
because when you look at nature and you look at the males, they typically have more colorful and fancy designs like birds to get the attention.
Yeah.
Is that beauty? I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, or you know, how is the female perceiving it? You know, or are they reading it differently?
It's just kind of an odd
Yeah, I don't
little
know.
thing, and I don't know whether the deer was actually admiring the sunset or just happened to be looking in that direction. You know,
I don't know what goes through a moth's mind when he's drawn to the
When it
light.
hits the window.
Yeah.
It's bottom.
Is that Bug's Life? So, very much movie that had that.
With the bug zapper?
Steve, yeah.
I think it was.
That was
Yeah, I
Toy
think it was
Story,
Bug.
wasn't it? No, that's not right.
No, I think it was Bug's Life. I think.
Bug's Life, maybe.
I don't remember. I know what you're talking about. It's like the trailer and.
No, isn't it a Terminex commercial?
Surely there
Might
was one of
be.
those too.
Oh, I just remember it.
Yeah, it's funny.
Steve, look away. I can't. It's so beautiful.
So, J. Warner Wallace at the end calls on Christians to appreciate the cumulative power of these arguments of natural theology for God's existence, and I would recommend considering this as something to have in your in your toolbox, so to speak. Particularly when addressing the problem of evil, because while the logical problem of evil doesn't really have any bearing, it has no, it doesn't really have teeth. Most, if not all, philosophers and scholars have abandoned the logical problem of evil. Nevertheless, the evidential problem of evil is pretty strong, and perhaps probably the best case against the existence of God. However, when confronting that problem, if you take the cumulative body of evidence, like the fine-tuning of the universe, the ontological argument, the existence of consciousness, the existence of objective morality, all of these things taken together form a much stronger case against the evidential problem of evil.
Could you expand on that just a little bit more about the evidential?
So there's four kinds of there's four branches in the problem of evil. There's the emotional problem and the intellectual problem, and we covered this in On Guard. The emotional problem is the idea that you're just really unhappy with the way things are. It's not so much an intellectual problem as much as it is an emotional problem, and oftentimes you'll see that. For example, Stephen Fry was interviewed because he's a prominent atheist, and the interviewer asked him, what would you say to God if you arrived at the pearly gates? And his answer was, bone cancer in children? How dare you? Well, is that an intellectual problem, or is that more of an emotional problem? I mean, you can tell that in his choice of words, he's angry at God because of the presence of suffering and evil. However, the intellectual problem of evil has its own pair of horns. There's the logical problem, which says that God and evil logically contradict with each other. If evil exists, then God cannot exist. That is a logically bankrupt argument. On the other side is the evidential problem of evil, which says that if God does exist, there shouldn't be as much evil as we see. There's just so much evil that it overwhelms the probability of God's existence. Like, given the evidence of the prevalence of evil, the evidence of evil just overwhelms the existence of God. And to that, you could say, well, sure, yeah, I would agree with that, but taken with what background information? Because all of this, I would say, greatly, vastly outweighs the evidence of evil and gratuitous evil and suffering and all of that. So
well, I think that, along with that, an argument against that is just that God in His Word has predicted and spoken of that evil and prophesied about it, and so He has told us ahead of time that this is
right.
going to be the case.
Right. Taken purely on the evidence of the existence of evil and the likelihood of God's existence in the face of such evil, just taken only that, you could, as Christians, we sadly would concede that, only in that isolated case is the evidence, outweighing. However, it's not really fair to take it in such an isolated case. If you take it in light of all of the other evidence, I would argue that this evidence tips the scales and outweighs the evidence against God's existence in the face of evil and suffering.
And I would say there's a faulty assumption in there as well, that who's to say that God doesn't use evil or have a purpose for it?
Right, exactly. And that's kind of in the logical problem. In the logical problem of evil, there's the hidden assumption that A, God can just create any old world He wants, and B, He prefers a world without evil. And neither of those are necessarily true. That isn't to say that they're false, but you would have to prove that they are necessarily true in order to logically bankrupt God's existence. Now, whether or not it's impossible for God to exist is separate from the evidential problem of evil, which is just that given all of the evil and suffering in the world, that makes God's existence highly unlikely. But you would have to ignore all of this in order to make such a concession. So he doesn't cover every single one of these, of course, but of the ones that he did cover in the chapter, which one would you say that you found the most compelling?
Well, you know my answer,
The design argument, the origin of life.
Origin of life.
I would say, what about the opposite of that? What's the least?
The least compelling.
Yeah. For me, would be religious experience.
Yeah. Yeah, Reformed epistemology is kind of tricky because it is inherently subjective, isn't it? It's entirely rooted in your own experience. However, for the person who has experienced it, that person cannot ascribe it to anything else. They know what they know. I mean, I've heard it described as being in love. So if you tell someone that I've fallen in love, and you ask them to prove it, how can they possibly prove it? It's a matter of their own experience, right? You just know it. It's self-authenticating, and the indwelling of the Holy Spirit is like that. It's self-authenticating. You just know.
I would say, for me, the fine-tuning argument or anthropic is an interesting problem for me, and I haven't come to resolution on it. I mean, it is, in one sense, very, very compelling. I mean, the evidence is just staggering how complex and how precise and all it is. And yet, on the other hand, I find that if it wasn't so, we wouldn't be asking the questions. wouldn't be here to ask that or to ponder that. And so it's almost like a moot argument. It's very precise and very, meticulously set up, and yet if it wasn't that way, then
Well,
we
but
wouldn't be here.
how does
So
that
that's not
how does that
relevant.
support the necessity of our existence? Like to say, well, of course it exists. Here we are to observe it. How does that support the necessity of our existence? Because the anthropic principle,
doesn't.
when someone
It doesn't.
uses that case, they're saying that it has to be this way and it can't be any other way because we wouldn't be here to observe it. You might recall the analogy in On Guard of the anthropic principle being like someone in a firing squad. You're tied up, you're blindfolded, all the guns go off, and you're still alive. There's 100 trained marksmen. Let's not even say 100. Let's say there's a billion. There's a stadium full of people in all directions, all trained with their guns on you, and every gun goes off at the same time, and you still live. And that would be a generous, charitable analogy. But to take the blindfold off and see the thousands of gunmen who all missed, you would think to yourself that it's rigged, wouldn't you? Or that surely it was designed for you to survive that, And so that's what the anthropic principle is people just saying, oh yeah, of course they missed because I'm still here. But that doesn't take away the fact that it's so inconceivably improbable for you to have survived such a thing.
But it's like I said, for me, it's on one hand, it's just absolutely compelling, and on the other hand, it's like, well, of course, it's obvious. If it wasn't this way, then we wouldn't be here to talk about it.
Well, I think the problem with the anthropic principle is that someone who's making an appeal to that is saying that it has to be that way. It's not just coincidence; it's necessity. It must be that way, and the reason they're kind of arguing. It's sort of question begging, isn't it? They're assuming the conclusion before even making any of the premises by saying that, well, yeah, of course it had to be that way because we're here to observe it. It's assuming the conclusion before even making an argument, and it's sort of a self-defeating presumption, because the whole reason they're making that case is to support the conclusion before they've even made any premises.
It doesn't have to be that way. So why is it that way?
Right. Maybe I misunderstand the anthropic principle, but as I understand it, the anthropic principle tries to make the claim that it has to be that way because here we are observing it, so it must have been that way. It's a necessity, and it couldn't have been any other way. Sorry, were you going to say something?
As far as we know. Because we haven't found life elsewhere. That was my pick, fine-tuning evidence. But I only have like 4 in my book, so.
Oh,
Moral,
I completely agree. In my opinion, the
design,
fine-tuning of the universe is
casual,
probably
and
the
fine-tuning.
strongest. I think fine-tuning of the universe is the strongest. I just noticed that there's no E in the. Is that in the book as well?
Fine-tuning of tech.
Yeah.
It's in the book
It
too.
is.
Uh-oh. Oops.
I think it's good.
Mine just says fine-tuning evidence.
Mm.
Doesn't even have the of the.
If you look at the fine tuning of the universe and the complexity of life, origin of life,
Yeah, those two taken together, I would say, are enough.
perfectly
Yeah.
entwined.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's interesting as you look further into microbiology and stuff. Chemistry is physics.
Mm-hmm.
And so, even the most basic interaction within the cell is dependent on the fine-tuning of the nuclear forces and all of details that had to be in place long before life could ever be conceived, even.
Right.
Yeah, that appearance of design, I like saying like the geometric designs of nature and nature. It's like if it's really truly chaotic and not designed, would you even see those? Because like a snail or a conch, they took an X-ray of it and you could see the different designs.
Mm-hmm.
If you line up like the first to fifth harmonics on top of the X-ray of the conch, they match.
Yeah.
It's like, is that coincidence? It seems designed.
Well, that overlaps a little bit with the argument from beauty, right? It's like it's not just that you think it looks pretty. It's that there's this
It's right.
Yeah, there's
It's
this
right.
order. It's orderly. It's very, very intricate, and the systems are just so elegant. So with that, don't have anything else for this week.
Oh, I just had a thought. I thought about this weekend.
Mhm.
Was we brought up the machines, the silly, what do you call it?
Rube Goldberg.
Rube Goldberg
Mhm.
machines and stuff. And so much of the operation of the cell and the immune system and so on is like Rube Goldberg type machine. And this does this, does this, does this,
Mhm.
triggers this, does this, does this.
But on a much larger scale, because it's
Yeah.
all happening all simultaneously.
Yeah. But it just struck me as how similar that is in terms of the complexity and you're wanting to achieve this, but you got to start clear over there and 300 steps in order to get there.
And to think that a lot of science, mainstream science and academia still are beholden to, the theory of evolution or Darwin, just, it's a cell. He knew absolutely nothing about it.
Mm-hmm.
And now we know, yet a lot of people just ignore that.
One of the things that think about the Rube Goldberg type deal and just the complexity of these systems within the cell. And all of these had to occur simultaneously for any of it to work. And if it didn't occur simultaneously, there's no way for natural selection to select for these systems. Yeah, it's just, there's logical impossibility.
Yeah, when I try to see it from the other side, I can imagine someone saying, "Well, yeah, Rube Goldberg machines aren't very good machines. I mean, it's this big elaborate thing just to do some menial task like switch off the lights. Why not just switch off the lights? Like if you're this grand intelligent designer, why not just make it so simple?" And on the same note as I said before about how the argument for beauty and aesthetic experience is just kind of a rehashing of the existence of objective morality. Dysteleology, or the argument from poor design, as we talked about in the evidence for God, it's really just kind of a rehashing of the problem of evil, right? So like when someone makes the case that we are poorly designed, and they point to perceived flaws, for example, the fact that we eat and breathe through the same hole, like that seems like kind of a poor design choice, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Even if you concede that it's a poor design choice, which I don't, I mean, you're killing two birds with the same stone, essentially. But in other cases, there are other, perhaps better, more compelling examples of poor design. The more you think about it, the more you consider this poor design, you kind of just arrive right back at the problem of evil and suffering, don't you? Why does God allow bad things to happen?
Well, but I think that in response to that, or at least a partial response to that, is okay, come up with a better design.
Well, I
You know,
mean,
there, we see a flaw in some design, like the root goal concept, in the cell.
mhm.
But come up with a shortcut. Come up with a system
And you
that
can,
can do that.
but then it's only good for that specific task.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Without an alternative, your question or your argument is kind of moot.
But to your point, yeah, you're adding that capability, but you're also eliminating other abilities. That's right. Because how do you maintain your abilities but expand them?
Because another argument for the poor design is unused DNA, or what they thought were unused portions of DNA. Well, now we know that they're actually used, but in a different process of part of our life, an earlier stage in our life.
Yeah.
Or regulation of other genes and stuff.
I don't know. I think there are cases of poor design that you could easily just come up with an answer. For example, the fact that humans don't synthesize their own DNA like so many other animals do. We don't, or not DNA, vitamin D, sorry. I said DNA, I meant vitamin D.
Yeah.
Vitamin D is synthesized by other animals, automatically, but we have to get it from external sources. So that's cited as a design flaw, with which
Really?
you could easily come up with,
That's how I got vitamin D from being in the sun.
Which is an interesting argument because, okay, well, what about all the other species? Do they have design flaws as well?
Oh yeah,
Are you
sure,
saying
of course.
that just because we're design flawed, therefore the design is flawed?
Well, they're just arguing that these flaws point to a lack of intelligent design. That's all. They're not saying that.
I guess the point you make is so good we become gods.
Well,
We have no
again,
flaws.
Look at your circumstantial evidence.
Right.
You have, 10 trillion evidences of great design, and you have one that maybe is questionable.
Right. Well, but for them, that's sufficient.
Yeah.
Unless it's 100% on one side,
Right.
if there's even just one possible doubt. And I think that's one of the cases that J. Warner Wallace was trying to make, was that we have this tendency to seek beyond all possible doubt, when really we should be content to settle for beyond all reasonable doubt, because skeptics don't want to believe. Just like back in the debate with Keith Parsons, Dr. Craig makes the argument, no amount of evidence would convince you, because you just simply don't want to believe.
O.J. Simpson case.
Yeah.
There was apparently some people in there that just refused to believe.
Yeah.
You look at all the evidence and, he's guilty. But somebody in there was just refused to believe that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had jury duty a couple months ago.
Am I the only one that wants jury duty? Like, everybody's always like, "Oh, I gotta go in for jury duty." I'm just like, pick me. I want to go into jury duty.
I've always gotten canceled. I've been picked like 3 times, 4 times in Colorado, and it always gets canceled.
I would love to go.
My
to
wife
jury
got
duty.
to sit in one.
It'd be cool.
It was a drug deal,
Oh, really?
and they convicted the woman.
Yeah, I've got a mixed feeling that it's like I've got, partway through to the jury selection kind of thing, and it's kicked out, and there's a part of me that wants to participate, but at the same time, I'm not afraid of it, but it's just such a hassle, going in and
Missing
wasting
work
so much
and-
time, missed work, and it's just the hassle of it is,
Yeah, I mean, they tell you up front, they do the whole weeding out the first days, or depending, it could be a week, but the first portion of it is just weeding out people who
Right.
they think aren't able to objectively make a decision about their emotions and whatnot. And it just
Which is sad,
blew my
because
mind.
if you have like people of quality character who are like, I just don't have time for that. I got other important things to do. Well, then who are our juries becoming?
Yeah.
Just
oh yeah.
the bottom of the barrel.
It's like the homeless guy that.
And then we complain about our justice system.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think they should just, ask the basic questions of, okay, are you related to this person? Do you have a direct connection to the case? Just kind of those basic stuff. And if you don't have any connection or whatever, then you're on the jury. Okay, we got 12 people.
Right.
The first 12 people to walk in.
Well, and that's what makes it so difficult is not everybody thinks like that.
Yeah.
So you'll have people who, think of it, if a person's actually innocent of being framed, but you have someone on the jury that's gone through what they're supposedly claiming this person did, and they're just, that's bad, it's bad, he's bad, guilty automatically because.
Or the opposite, like the
Yeah.
OJ trial. Maybe that person
I was
wasn't
real
vetted
worried
very
that
well,
something
or
was
those
Yeah,
two
that's
people,
true.
and they had an objective. Like,
Yeah.
I don't care what they show me, I'm saying not
Sure.
guilty all the way.
Sure.
Because
OJ, yeah.
maybe because they liked OJ as a football player or something. I don't,
Yeah,
or,
no, it's yeah, I agree.
or because of the police violence or something in California. Like, oh, I'm gonna get him back.
Yeah.
That was that animal case. It's sort of like a lot of people are. I have animals, and I can't make a judgment. I'm emotionally connected.
Right.
Like,
Right.
That's bizarre to me because of the way my brain works. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
We went to the deliberation room after they weeded out all the people. They thought they had the best jury. We're in the deliberation room, and they immediately go straight to emotional. Like, they picked a guy to be the head for all of us. He has to sign off. And first thing he said, coming out of his mouth, was talking about emotions, and I was like, whoa, wait. He said, don't use her emotions.
I feel. So, is he gonna touch on any of these throughout the rest of this book?
No, I think it was isolated to this chapter. He does talk about another book that he wrote called God's Crime Scene, where that whole book is just entirely focused on natural theology, cosmogony, the origin of the universe, philosophical arguments of contingency and necessity, and fine-tuning, and morality.
Is there any other books you guys would suggest?
Oh,
I mean, one or two.
Careful.
Don't, not like 20. I don't need 20.
On the nature.
Your favorite book for this.
particularly for natural theology.
Or just
I think
any
On
of
Guard.
those.
On Guard would be a really good one. On Guard's kind of a popular level introduction to apologetics. It leans heavily on natural theology, the problem of evil and suffering, and the fine-tuning of the universe and the origin of the universe, cosmological argument, and things like that. The higher level version of that book is called Reasonable Faith. That's more of a graduate level book that covers all of the same arguments in addition to a few more philosophical arguments.
We did 50 evidences for Christ in our last go around. That one's probably like this thick, and it's really good. It talks about the scientific evidences for God, and then the philosophical evidences and theological evidences. And then there's another book called A Critique on Theological Evolution, which is kind of like that on steroids, kind of like the academic version of it.
Yeah, it's much more graduate level.
And
But that's specifically on evolution.
It talks about the philosophical, the scientific, and the theological implications of evolution.
And then these two that I grabbed this is kind of an introduction to the problems of evolution and just the kind of complexity of the cell and stuff. And then this one is just it's graduate level chemistry and physics and biology and stuff. It's really in depth, but it's very, very excellent. But it's you got to work through it.
Right.
So These are available if you're interested in either of these.
God's Crime Scene is a book by the same author that covers these arguments, the origin of the universe, objective morality, problem of evil, fine-tuning, things like that. Which we could do as a group one day, if you like.
Yeah, I got the extra copy of 50 Evidences for God. I'll try to remember to bring it in.
I'm pretty new to the whole, this more of the, I guess, in-depth research on it. Like, I know the topics, but like, all this list, these ideas, I don't know, what would you call these?
Arguments and evidence.
Arguments.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I'm not super familiar with all of them.
Yeah, and those span all different categories.
Right.
Philosophical, theological, scientific.
There's whole areas of study on each one of those.
Exactly.
If you really want to go deep into natural theology, I would recommend this book, Blackwell's Companion to Natural Theology. It's not cheap, but this covers, and this is graduate level writing. So there's like physics, astrophysics in here that I don't even understand.
Mm-hmm.
Comparing all of the different expansion models of the universe, oscillating universes, and but this, let me find the table of contents. This covers the Leibnizian cosmological argument, the Kalam cosmological argument, the fine-tuning of the universe, the argument from consciousness, the argument from reason, the moral argument, the argument from evil, the argument from religious experience, the ontological argument, the argument from miracles, and that's it. I'm surprised miracles isn't on here.
Yeah, religious experience. I guess.
Yeah, religious experience is in there, but yeah, it'd be fun to do a dive into this
I'm gonna
research.
pick that up.
The funny thing is, when you order it, take a look on the very last page, because I'm pretty sure they print these on demand.
Really?
It says November
dates?
5th, 2022, and I ordered it like that day. So it's like it's printed on demand. I could be wrong about that, but like I got it November 7th, 2022, and I saw on the back page it says 5th November 2022. I was like, did they just print this on demand? Like, what?
That's cool.
Maybe I'll have to order a new one just to compare and see.
I would buy hardback if I could, but I think those are in such limited, quantities. They don't print those.
What was the name of that again?
Blackwell's Companion to Natural Theology. You can take a look at it if you want.
Just take a picture of it.
So this week we'll be reading chapter 4, Test Your Witnesses, and this has to do with the authors of the Gospels and other books in the Bible. So.
Thank you.
Of course. Shall we close with prayer? Father, we love you and we thank you for the rich universe that you have provided for us to discover just how incredible you are as a creator. And Lord, I just pray that you would open our eyes to the realities around us that you've created, and give us the words to share with skeptics and non-believers. Lord, I just pray that you would strengthen our faith and help us to see those around us that you want to share your love with through us. Lord, I pray that you would be with us this week. I pray that your Holy Spirit would speak to us as we study your word. In Jesus' name, amen.
It's just interesting. I just had another thought on that. Rube Goldberg. And it's funny, we see these Rube Goldberg setups. Well, imagine the cell as, thousands of these Rube Goldberg machines going on at the same time and not interfering with one another. You know, and it's just
Well,
kind of
sometimes
interesting, hard to picture.
sometimes they do interfere with each other, but
Would be like sequential Goldberg machines. So this one does this, and then the ending result goes into that one.
yeah.
And loop.
And then, but just, you know, you think about it in terms of the physical, you know, Rube Goldberg machines, and how they would be independent of each other.
Yeah, the independence thing is.
You know, that's
That's
you know,
really
kind
bad.
of hard to even comprehend. It does that, and like, there's parts in the cell that form highways, basically, in the cell, and stuff is transported along those highways, and then when that is no longer needed, the highway dissolves. You know, it's
Yeah.
just like, it's just absurd, just crazy.